Hello guys and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, we're going to be covering an extremely important concept which should hopefully help you guys to understand syllogisms a little bit more. And this goes hand in hand with the arrow method. Okay, so if you guys have not watched my arrow method video yet, it's probably best to watch it after you watch this video, if anything, but especially after watching the introduction. So what I would say is you probably watch the introduction first and then you go off, watch the arrow method video, and then you can come back to some of these questions. Okay, and basically the idea is I'll talk about some of basically what this idea is about creating the hypothetical. I'll talk about the basis behind it, some of the key ideas, as well as implementing it. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is the reasoning. So obviously you guys may not be familiar with what creating the hypothetical is. I'll get onto that in just a second, but there is a reasoning behind it. Okay, so with these syllogism questions, you're asked to put yes if the statement follows or no if the statement doesn't follow. But remember, yes is if the statement follows, no is if the statement doesn't follow or if there's not enough information. So the statement doesn't follow if there's a direct contradiction or if there's just not enough information. Does that make sense? So for that reason, this is where creating the hypothetical comes in, because often it's the case that you might not be aware whether or not you can conclude something. Like things might be a little bit more ambiguous, and in that case what you do is you try and create a hypothetical, and we'll get onto exactly what that is in just a second. Okay, and you try to create a hypothetical that argues against the original statement, and if you're successful in doing that, that means the original statement must be false. Okay, so let me just take a minute to explain exactly what I mean. So imagine, for example, and this is the same example that I used in my other video. So imagine if you were given a statement, 4 is an odd number. Okay, and let's say you didn't know that. Let's say you didn't know that. Okay, let's say you couldn't tell whether that was true or false. Like you didn't know what to conclude with that. But let's say you knew that an opposing statement, so 4 is an even number. So obviously numbers can only be even or odd, right? So let's say instead you were told that 4 is an even. So instead, let's say you knew that 4 is an even number. Well, remember what I said. Something can't be both odd and even at the same time. So because the opposite is true, because this statement is true, the opposite is true, our original statement must be false. So now I can confidently conclude that this is false. Okay. So in a similar kind of vein, for example, if you're told something like, if you're told something about a certain statement, so let's say, for example, X is tall, okay, but you don't know anything about that, okay, you can't conclude whether that's true or not, but you're told X is an athlete, all athletes are short. Okay, you can quite clearly see here is a direct contradiction of that idea, right? Because it's a direct contradiction to that idea, even if you can't conclude this, because you know the opposite is true, the original statement must be false. Okay, so the point is, what we try and do with these syllogism questions is that when the statement comes up, we try and create a hypothetical that disagrees with the original statement, that's at odds with the original statement. Okay, and I'll talk you through exactly what I mean using some of the examples and some of the questions that we have coming up. Okay, so that's the main reason behind it. So the main kind of like logic and reason behind doing it is because sometimes it's a bit sketchy. There might not necessarily be enough information, or it might be difficult for you to figure out exactly if something is true or false. So what you can do instead is you can create a virtual hypothetical that could be true based off the information given. Okay, so point 2 is rules. So you can't just create any hypothetical, right? So for example, if it tells you something like all the flowers in this bucket are yellow, and then it tells you some other information as well, so blah blah blah, it tells you some other information. You can't create a hypothetical where a flower in the bucket. So imagine this is the premise. So this is the statements that the paragraph you're given. Then you'll have your 5 statements below, right? And you can put yes or no to each one of these. So if this is the info you know for sure. So when you're creating a hypothetical, you can't create anything that contradicts this. Instead, what you're trying to do is you're trying to contradict the statements here, right? So if one of the statements here said something specifically about a color of something, then you can't say, oh, I'm going to create a hypothetical where the flowers are purple. Well, that's wrong, because all the flowers in this bucket are only yellow, so you can't create that. Okay, you could create a hypothetical where the flowers outside of the bucket are purple. That's fine, as long as you're not told anything about it. Like, it could be true. Okay, but in terms of rules, you can't create a hypothetical that disagrees with any of the information in the premise, basically, because otherwise then there's no point. You're just making sentences up. Okay, once again, this will all make more sense once I kind of talk you through, guys, through some examples and elaborate things on a little bit more. The next thing that's really important is practice. Okay, practice just helps you so much to be able to get better at this idea. And so one of the things that I have available is that I have over 5 or 6 syllogism questions and syllogism videos. And in those videos, I cover a variety of different questions where I try to do this. So one of the things that I'll say is you do not necessarily have to create the hypothetical for every question. It will take you too long. It's more for the questions that are a little bit trickier to think about. Okay, and for the standard ones, you definitely don't have to create it, right? Like there'll be ones that are way more obvious, but it's more for the tricky ones where it comes in really handy. Okay, so the important idea here is also about practicing and understanding which type of question. So the last thing I've written here is question styles. So one of the things that I've mentioned in syllogisms is that even amongst syllogisms, there are styles of syllogisms. Okay, so you have to learn what you want to watch out for exactly. Okay, so which style of syllogism am I going to do? What does this look like? What does that look like? How does it translate across? What is the common mistakes I keep making? And making sure that you're reviewing these videos effectively. And that's the other thing that I want to say as well. If you guys haven't watched my review video yet, I'd really recommend you to do so, because in that I talk about a lot of interesting ideas. Okay, so this is just kind of like a main summary of things. Let's get into some of the questions here then. Okay, so let's have a look here. So obviously I'm going to use the arrow method now, which some of you guys, like I said, will be familiar with, but some of you may not be as familiar with it. And one of the things that I would like to say is, like I said, the arrow method is something that I use personally. You don't necessarily have to do this, but completing the hypothetical, you probably should works for any method that you use, right? Completing the hypothetical is more about comprehension. It's nothing to do with the arrow method in itself, but the arrow method will help you comprehend things better, I believe anyways. But no, it definitely isn't a necessity. It's not like you have to do it in order to score this mark or that mark or to do well at it, but I definitely think it is something to try out if you haven't done so already. Okay, so let's have a look at this. So all of the paint came in small or large pots. Okay, except for blue, which was only available in small pots. So what I can do here is I can put blue and I can put only. Okay, and so this is what I mean. So for example, in one of the questions, if you're going to try and create a hypothetical, you can't create a hypothetical where blue comes in large pots, because that defies the original premise of the question of the syllogism here. Okay, the only colors beside blue were red and green. Okay, so that means in total the colors you have are blue, red, and green. Okay, it says there are more red than blue, but not as many as green. So let's say this is going to be more red than blue. So let's say blue is X. And then this can be, well, actually, I've got a better way of doing it. What I'll say is this is X. I'll say blue is less than X, and green will be greater than X. Okay, so there were more red than blue, but not as many as green. Okay, so there were more small pots of red paint than small pots of green paint. Well, the point here is we don't know. Okay, so we're not given enough information. All we know is that only blue is small, and it says all paint came in small or large except for blue, which is only in small pots. All of the paint is small or large. So yes, there'll be small pots of red paint, there'll be small pots of green paint. So the reason why you say, obviously you can just conclude no immediately because there's not enough information here. But if you were going to use creating the hypothetical, which like I said, I probably wouldn't use here because it's quite an easy one to think about. I would say, instead of saying that there are small pots of red paint than small pots of green paint, could you say that there are equal amounts of small pots of red and green paint? You could do. Okay, and then obviously that would have a knock-on effect on the large paint pots, because obviously there's more red than there's more green than red. But it could be true that there's more small green than red. It could be that there's equal amounts, and so on and so on. Okay, the only large pots of paint were either red or green. So once again, what do I try and do? I try and create a hypothetical. Can you have it so that the only large pots of paint were not red or green? Okay, no, you can't, because blue is only small. Remember, you can't create a hypothetical that's not within the kind of confines of this premise. So here, and once again, this is quite a standard yes as well, so you probably didn't need to create the hypothetical. The point that I'm trying to prove here is, I'm trying to prove this hypothetical. The only large pots were blue. Is this true? Okay, and by the way, there's not one hypothetical. There's a million you could have used. So you could have said that there's also large blue pots that are blue. It doesn't just have to be the only large pots were blue. But the point here is you can't say that. Okay, you can't say that. And so for that reason, because you can't say that, and the reason why you can't say that is because blue is only in the small, the hypothetical is false, and so our original statement must be true. Okay, so I know in all of the other previous kind of questions that we've done, the hypothetical could be true, and so our original statement was false, but here it's the other way around. So you can see exactly how it works. Okay, so there were more small pots of paint than there were blue pots. So here is an interesting question. Okay, so perhaps you guys can take a really quick pause and see what you think the answer is going to be to a question like this. And then we can come back and discuss it as such. Okay. So there were more small pots of paint than there were blue pots. Well, how many blue pots are there? Well, I mean, the blue pots are just the small ones. And we know that all paint comes in small or large pots except for blue, which is only available in small. So that means that there are small green and small red pots as well. So therefore, this has to be true. Okay, so you can't create a hypothetical here. So if you try to create a hypothetical saying there are more blue pots than small pots of paint, then that'll be wrong. You can't really do that because, like I said, there are small pots of the red and green which kind of tip the number over. There are more large red pots than small blue pots. So once again, you create a hypothetical. It could be that there is only one large red pot and there could be two small blue pots. Okay, and you might think, oh, but that doesn't work with this. Well, it would work because then the small red pots will compensate to end up with more overall. Does that make sense? But the point is, you can create a hypothetical where this is not true, where it could be that there are more small blue pots than large red pots. There were more green pots than there were red pots. Well, this is just true based off the diagram. You don't have to do any hypothetical stuff here. I mean, you can try to, but once again, you'll fail. And because of that, the original statement must be true. Okay, you can quite clearly see here. Okay, let's go on to the next question then. Okay, so all jinks are frungs. Not all frungs are jinks. So whenever you write something like this, what that kind of implies is, so not all F's are J's means that there's going to be some F's that are not J's. So that must mean there's going to be more F's than J's. And so one of the questions and one of the answers that's going to come up here is probably going to ask something to do with that. Okay, but okay, let's keep going. Some of the frungs that are not J's are zoobs. So you can say frungs are going to be either J's or they're going to be not J's. We don't know how many that is. But of these, some of these are going to be zoobs. And it says no zoob is a jinx. And since, remember what we said about the word some is 2 to 99. So one of the other things that's really, really important is to learn the definitions of these words, which once again I've covered in my first syllogism video if you guys haven't checked it out. So some means 2 to 99, which means there's at least one frung that is not a jinx, that is not a zung. So to represent that, I'm just going to put a question mark here. That just reminds me that something else is going on. So there are more frungs than jinx. Well, this must be true because all J is F. And remember, not all the F is J. There's some F that's not J. So this must be true. And once again, there's no point you creating a hypothetical here. You'll just fail. And also, this is easy enough to do in your head without necessarily needing it. And so this is what I mean. It's not like you need to do it on every question, but it's going to be vital for those harder questions. A frung that is not a jinx must be a zoob. Well, you can see a frung that is not a jinx, so you follow it down here, must be a zoob. Well, not necessarily, because you could also be this question mark here. Do you see? So what I do is I create a hypothetical where I say it's not a zoob, and that could be true based off my diagram and ideas here. Okay, so yep, all zoobs are frungs. There's no info here. So here we know that froobs that are not jungs, some of them are zoobs. Okay, but I can create a hypothetical where I say that some zungs are not froobs. I can just make up a random letter. I can say that some zoobs are joyels. I don't know, whatever. But the point is that that could still be true based off our diagram here, because there's nothing to disagree with the matter, right? It doesn't say all frungs is or F is Z anywhere. Okay, and so because I say some Z is J or whatever it is, that would make this statement wrong where it says all zoobs are frungs, because it would mean that obviously by some Z being J and not F, this statement would be wrong. Okay, once again, creating a hypothetical. Some J's are zoobs, so some jinks are zoobs. Well, you can see here, this is, this one you don't need the hypothetical for, but this is quite clearly a mutually exclusive idea. So no Z's are J's. So this is once again wrong. And the last one, not all frungs are jinx or zoobs. Not all throngs are jinx or zoobs. That's true because some of them, or well, at least one of them, sorry, not some of them, at least one of them is this question mark here. So that's true. Okay, so you can really see how, like I said, the other thing, this is what I meant about with the practice. You can kind of see how they, like, the styles repeat so often. And a question like this, I promise you, will come up many, many times in your Medify and Med-Entry question bank practices. But it's just about understanding it, recognizing it, being able to properly figure out what's going on. And most of the time, you probably won't even have to use creating the hypothetical. Okay, let's keep going. So all of the red flowers were roses, except for a few of the poppies, most of which were yellow. So red flowers, all of them were roses, except for a few poppies. It says most of which were yellow. So most of the red flowers are roses. So you're either a rose or a poppy, basically. Okay. The only other flowers were white. Okay. So I can't say that then. The only other flowers were white, but most of the white flowers were neither roses nor poppies. Okay, so you've got white flowers, and it says most. I'm going to put, this is a weird one. So most were not those. So this is not my greatest arrow, I'll be honest, but I think this is probably the best way to do something like this. Okay, so none of the white flowers were roses or poppies. I would say this is wrong because we can create a hypothetical where you could have a white flower that is a rose or a poppy, because it says most of them weren't roses or poppies. Do you see? Okay. There were more yellow poppies than red or white. I would say this is true because most poppies were yellow. Remember? So this is going to be true. And most is 51 to 99. So even if it was the lower number, which is 51, there has to be more yellow than the other two combined. The only red flowers were roses or poppies. This is going to be true because it says here, all the red flowers are mostly roses, and there are a few poppies as well. So actually, yeah, we can put the all back there. Okay. All of the roses were red. We don't know that. Okay, and so this is where I can create a hypothetical. I could create a rose that's white, can't I? Because it says most of them weren't roses or poppies. It could mean that there's one white rose in there. So I create a hypothetical, and because I create that hypothetical, my original statement must be false. So instead of saying all the roses are red, I'm going to change that to one rose is white, or not all of the roses are red, and that is true. And that's at odds with my original statement. Okay, there were at least 3 different types of flower. So it says you have roses, you have poppies, and it says most white flowers are neither roses or poppies, so there must be something else, so that's true. So once again, you didn't have to create a hypothetical here. It was easy enough to kind of like read off the information kind of shown to us. Okay, cool. So let's keep going then, and on to our final example. Okay, so with this question, so watching TV shows is only beneficial when the content is educational. All TV shows created by the biggest production companies must be entertaining. Few entertaining TV shows are educational. So the whole thing's about TV shows, so I'm not really going to incorporate that into my diagram. But so watching is only beneficial when the content is educational. So watching, beneficial only when content is educational. All TV shows created by the biggest production, so I'm going to put edu. All TV shows created by the biggest production companies must be entertaining, and few entertaining are educational. Okay, so no TV shows created by the biggest production companies are educational. Well, that's wrong. You can just look at the diagram because few are educational. Because the biggest production companies must make entertaining TV shows, and few of those are educational. So it's wrong to say that none of them are educational, because it could be that there are a few that are educational. Few entertaining TV shows are beneficial to watch. Yes, because only a few of them are educational. And out of those, and obviously for it to be beneficial to watch, it has to be educational. Okay, cool. If a TV show is educational, watching it must be beneficial. Well, it's one of those where the only way in which watching a TV show is beneficial is if the content is educational. But if the content is educational, it doesn't automatically mean watching it must be beneficial. So think about it like this. So this is one of the common examples that I use. So let's say, for example, all people who are 6 foot tall, let's say to go to the Olympics, you have to be 6 foot tall. That doesn't mean every person who's 6 foot tall does go to the Olympics. It just means out of everyone at the Olympics, they will all be 6 foot tall. Make sense? So what I do here is I create a hypothetical where I say, let's say there is a TV show that's educational, but watching it is not beneficial. And that's fine. And it would still, it still fits with this diagram. It might seem a little bit weird, like surely you might think, oh, well, surely it doesn't fit because watching TV shows is only beneficial when the content is educational. Like it does fit, because I'm saying that there is an educational program, which actually it's not beneficial to watch. But that wouldn't make the statement wrong, because the statement says anything that is beneficial to watch is educational. That would still be right. Okay? It's a weird one, but once again, this is what I mean. This is what you have to get used to learning and figuring out. An educational TV show must not be entertaining. Once again, that's wrong. As you can see here, a few of the entertaining ones are educational. So you create a hypothetical where you could have an educational TV show that is entertaining. Okay? You don't have anything against the rule. It's not like the two are mutually exclusive. Okay? And then, if a TV show is beneficial to watch, it must be educational. That's true, because the only way it can be beneficial to watch is only if it's educational. So the last one is true. Okay, so I hope you guys found this video helpful, and hopefully this clarified some of the doubts around this video. I do still understand that it is a difficult concept to be able to try and grasp. And if you'd like, you can put some of your scenarios down in the comments below, especially if there are specific ones you're really struggling to understand, and I will do my best to get to them and give you some hypotheticals. So this will normally be, so if you have you'd have to give me the premise and then the statement below to which the answer was yes or no. So if you just tell me the answer as well, and then I can tell you why that is the answer, if that makes sense, by replying to your comments down below. So it might take me some time, but I'll do my best to get through to them. But most importantly, if you guys can try and understand this concept first and then apply the logic yourself, then that'll definitely be the better way of going about things, if that makes sense. Okay, so I hope this video was helpful. As always, please do let me know what you'd like to see next, and I will see you guys in the next video.